Welcome to the Sober is Dope podcast. I'm your host, Pop Buchanan, and today we have our in-house drug expert extraordinaire, Macaulay Sexton. This is his second time on the Sober is Dope. He will be our in-house guy going forward for the multiple people in the recovery community that join Sober's Dope space that really want someone to emphasize drug use, drug misuse, and recovery and early recovery and everything drug related. This is a guy I trust. He has a lot of integrity. He grows with the science, and he's all over the place. You may remember him from our episode Pharmaceutical Abuse, where he really went in on benzodiazepines and different type of drugs and how they have an effect on the body. Today we want to expand. There's been a lot of changes in the space, so we're here to ask him a bunch of questions and get caught up. Macaulay, how you feeling today, brother?
What's up, bro? I'm feeling good. I'm glad to be talking to you, bro.
All right. Well, look, this is what I want to start off by asking. I have 10 powerful questions, but the first one off the top is, since we last spoke, right? And for, you had a different paradigm about addiction, recovery, drugs, and everything. And since then, science changed. Fentanyl has hit. We got this thing Trank on the streets. You've been working with a lot of people. What has changed in you and your outlook on how you look at the whole industry and addiction and recovery since then? Let's start there. What's changed?
All right, I love this question. This is straight up exciting, bro. Like, I love to talk about this stuff. So basically, I had many epiphanies. Like, I've had a bunch of shifts and changes throughout this process. And in the past 3 years, it's been drastic to where I completely reevaluated the way that I advocate. Like, straight up, dude, like a full blown shift, almost like an awakening of sorts, to where I realized that the way that I was advocating was ultimately through the lens of stigma and my own subjective experience. And that bias was fucking up my ability to advocate for the majority, because I found that when we look at stats, they're stacked against us. The stats aren't good. We can defy those stats. We don't have to be another statistic. So I got to be clear on that. Like, that's my true belief. But I realized that as a person in long-term recovery, I had a huge responsibility to be informed on the various things that were available. And I was just seeing it through just the same lens that I always had. And it wasn't that I was being mean or malicious or like willingly judgmental. I just realized that we were in a extreme crisis, like you mentioned, we're in an extreme crisis. And how am I positively impacting the community as a whole? And so I started looking at the words I was saying. I transitioned into person first language, like saying substance use disorder instead of addiction, saying alcohol use disorder instead of alcoholism. A lot of these things are kind of rooted in pseudoscience. And I noticed that I wanted to be a little bit more mindful. Now, this isn't a jab at anyone using these labels or words, because this is all subjective. So everyone has the right to self-label, to speak really any way they want to. But this is just my personal journey to where I reevaluated everything. I got out of some of the kind of victim blamey stuff that I learned in early recovery and balanced that with accountability. So for me, it's about, you take accountability for your life, but you don't take accountability for things that you have no control over. And for me, I realized that I had a lot of trauma in getting into recovery and going through treatment even. And I was kind of invalidating that. And I had this mentality of, nah, bro, I'm just going so hard with all this recovery stuff. And that discipline is great, but it became rigidity for me. And so I had to pull back and be like, yo, like, how is this affecting me? And how is this affecting everyone else? So the game has changed completely for me. I wasn't really even fully into harm reduction when we talked. I was like looking into it. Now I'm like a harm reduction provider. Like, I give out naloxone and test strips. I have a collaboration with Overdose, which is an awesome nonprofit in Cali. So like, bro, it's just changed drastically. So that's why I was really excited to talk to you, because like, I'll say this shit to anyone who will listen. And again, like, you know, this isn't about policing people and telling them that they're wrong and they need to stop saying certain words. This is more about my individual journey, you know?
I love that. I love that. Wow, it's powerful. Harm reduction. I'm always been a supporter. We have a really bunch of people in the Sober is Dope community that was big harm reductionists. I guess that's right. That like Jen Elizabeth, she's big. You know, she was telling me, Pop, you know, it's one thing to do podcasting, it's one thing, but it's another thing to be on the ground and actually bringing care packages to people and actually helping people out on the ground and going out there and taking care of people on the street that's really hurting. Also, shout out to Jen Elizabeth, who's big, and also Soldiers for Recovery, Suleiman Hassan, who's on the ground every day. These guys they're out there. She's, I think, in Cali. He be in Kensington, PA. I know you saw the videos about Kensington, Pennsylvania, right? Where they have that whole place where their addicts are allowed to go and just take refuge and just use. So it's almost like this little Six Flags Great Adventure looking place where it's just everyone using. I mean, for lack of a better, but at this, you know, it's heartbreaking. Every time someone sees that, it's heartbreaking because now you're seeing 300 to 400 people together really struggling with addiction. So harm reduction for me, I think I had to really soften myself up because I understand it. Like the first time I encountered it was one of my friends was getting off of heroin, and she was like, I'm smoking weed and using mushrooms and plant-based medicines to get off of that. And I was like, what? I mean, at that point, weed to me was like the hair off. Like, yo, by all means, do all the weed in the world you want. If it means you getting off of heroin and all of this hard stuff. Because, I mean, not too many people really had to deal with someone they love up close. They were like on heroin, trying to, like, that's hard to eat. So what's your take on overall? I mean, first, could you break down harm reduction as you know it to be? Because everyone is different. And what's your take on the harm reduction space?
So basically, I had to completely, I don't want to say re-educate, but I kind of had to deprogram from a lot of the stuff that's out there as far as the public perception of harm reduction. Right. I also had to kind of distinguish that, like, people, in my opinion, people utilizing cannabis or psychedelics, you know, in their recovery, you can label that as harm reduction, but ultimately it's just recovery. So like,
right.
That's a clear thing that I've learned in the past 3 years, is that a lot of times people do feel invalidated when you're only labeling it as harm reduction. Right. And that's not something that I'm saying you're doing at all, bro. But that was something that I became aware of through people articulating it. And I was like, oh, okay. So, you know, like, for instance, things like medication assisted treatment, like Suboxone or methadone, I just viewed that as harm reduction, when in reality, for people who are like working at their recovery and they are actively recovering and gaining the things they lost, that's straight up recovery. You know what I mean?
Straight up recovery.
It can be reducing harm. And I have my own biases towards things like methadone. You know, I had a very bad experience with it. But a lot of harm reduction for me is kind of checking myself. And because we can get real fired up. Like, you know what it's like. We want to defend people who are suffering, and we want to try to reduce suffering. But the thing is a lot of this is totally subjective. And so it's like, for me, harm reduction is a philosophy. It's not just the practice of action, but it's a way of thinking that I embody in my own life as it relates to consumption of anything. So it's not just substances for me. You know, I cut out substances, and now my harm reduction is around food and drinking water and getting sleep and how I talk to myself. But that's getting too deep with it.
No, that's deep. That's good.
Now, what I perceive harm reduction as, again, it's a philosophy. There are tenets of harm reduction. It's around autonomy and respecting someone as they are. It's about not devaluing someone because they actively use substances. And it's also about not only validating someone if they are seeking recovery. So it's really like you're validating human life, and it's not with the main emphasis on them even potentially getting into recovery if that's not something that they want. And that for me was hard to accept, because I perceive recovery as the best reprieve that anyone could get who's using substances. But then I was lumping in all substance users into the umbrella of substance use disorder, which honestly is not accurate. When you look at statistics and people who actually get substance use disorder, it's not as much as you would actually think. There are some claims that it's about, I think, 10 to 15% of people who use substances actually get substance use disorder. Don't quote me on that. That's literally hearsay. I've heard people say this. And so I don't think that's like, a solid stat. But according to, what I'm hearing people say that are actively using and stuff, there just needs to be an emphasis on valuing life regardless of if someone's seeking recovery or not, and keeping them alive long enough to where if they want to seek recovery, they can survive to even do that, So right. It's perceived as enabling, that just to address the fucking elephant in the room, that is what the general public really sees harm reduction as. And the truth of the matter is that no one's going out and shooting up for the first time because they can get a clean needle. No one's like, it doesn't make that shit sound appealing. Like, most people are terrified of needles. When it comes to that, we're also, harm reduction nonprofits are giving out needles to people that need to use insulin. So even the argument that, well, what about people that, what about free insulin and shit? It's like, well, if you really looked into it, harm reduction agencies are actually helping those people by giving them, the needles that you use to administer insulin. So, the thing is I get it. I understand the judgment. I understand that. And I had some of that, bro. Like, I had to check it and like, where are we at? The whole game has changed, bro. The whole game has changed. People everyone's dying now. And so it's like, I'm in full support of safe supply at this point, which I was against. Like, I was like, nah, no way. Like, I think they need to prescribe opioids again. I think that, all
right, let's get there. Let's stop there for a minute. This is deep. All right, so you're going into a lot of good areas. I want to, before we get into the opioid thing, because that's something that's been coming up. I've been hearing doctors talking about it. There's a camp on both sides. There's a camp with the harm reduction. So every day I'm learning also, right, with being on Instagram and stuff. So I posted something about harm reduction, and this guy hit me in the inbox and was like, you don't understand how dangerous it is and how ugly it is. And he started sending me all these videos and all of this stuff. And it was kind of in the spirit of, it's wrong. They're enabling all of these people to use, like, they're bringing all of these needles, they're bringing all of this stuff, they're giving people all of this stuff, and it's proliferating the whole pandemic of drugs and making it more prevalent out there. Is that true? Is that a true assessment for people who feel like giving addicts or people who are dependent, chemically dependent and drug dependent, all of these utensils, is it helping or is it hurting?
So 100%, it's reducing bloodborne illnesses. It is reducing OD deaths. Like, when we look at safe use sites, no one dies at a safe use site, bro.
Okay.
Then no one dies there. There's people who are trained, there's a lot of times like off-duty EMS people who are also in recovery or who are just advocates. Like, no one passes away in those spaces. When it comes to distributing needles, it reduces bloodborne illnesses. Like, look, the thing is like, I understand that way of thinking. That way of thinking is also tied to the war on drugs. Okay. And the people who are perpetuating that way of thinking are thus perpetuating the war on drugs and continued prohibition, which is fueling the current opioid epidemic. Because of prohibition, the manufacturers of these substances are navigating and creating different analogs, which are stronger. And so the more we prohibit this, the more we police this, the more that we shame and don't provide the resources to reduce harm, it will get worse. That's basically, like, the way that I put it is that we lost the war on drugs, and us as the United States are like on the ground trying to like bite the ankle of drugs. Like, dude, we're not going to give up. And they're like getting stomped out and stomped out, getting hit with the butt of the rifle. And we're just like, nah. And so really, look, that perception that it's like promoting more or it's like creating more, no, it's bringing things to light. Like, you can see it when it's in this space. You're aware of it instead of kind of, pushing it into the closet and kind of just trying to to keep it moving and not really acknowledge what's going on. But this is all evidence-based. Like when you look at other countries that have implemented harm reduction, and just an emphasis on like prioritizing human life, people start to do better. So the main issue here, I won't get too, like, I'm obviously really into this stuff, but I won't go too far. I'll just say the main issue is our cultural understanding of substance use disorder and that stigma related to it that further isolates the person that's experiencing this, and that basically vilifies them while simultaneously devaluing their life and dehumanizing them, which contributes to a decline in mental health and self-worth. And that's where we see behavioral issues and things that we associate with being an addict, when in reality, those are just associated with being basically a devalued person in society that has a maladapted coping skill that's really a lack of coping skills. So a lot of this has to do with just the public misunderstanding of what substance use disorder is, and that somehow by keeping people alive, they have a problem with that. There's a lot of people that have a problem with that. They want people with substance use disorder to die, straight up. And that's, bro, like I've been, into this for a while now, and I'm not just making that claim. This is a real thing. People mention natural selection all the time. They say we need to just get rid of all the junkies. So this is a real, like, people would be okay with a straight up genocide, basically, of people with substance use disorder. There are people who would be completely fine with that. So that stresses the importance of harm reduction, because we have a large majority. I don't want to say that's too generalized, but we have people within the United States that actively want people with substance use disorder to die and are okay with that.
That's sad, man. And that's horrifying to think. So my thing with the opioid crisis and them, it's a prohibition on opioids right now, right? That's what kind of how you framed it. That's a beautiful way to frame it. There's people who make the argument that this whole drug war and pandemic and fentanyl crisis and all of this stuff we're dealing with started in the opioid crisis, with doctors prescribing these highly addictive pills, the Sackley family and all of this stuff. And now, if we reinstate opioid use with that, how would that help the situation? And could you just give us your overview on that whole opioid crisis now versus how you were 2 years ago when you was on Sober's Dope? What changed there, and what would you like to see?
All right, so everything has changed. I was a person spreading this rhetoric that opioids need to be basically like not on the market anymore. I do think that opioids are not effective long-term treatment for chronic pain, but that's for me in my life. I can't dictate that for everyone. That would just be extremely biased and messed up. So I had to check that, and I had to actually do some research and figure out where we're at. And I found that basically, look, the Sackler family and their practices were unethical. Curtis Wright at the FDA, unethical. The overprescription, the manipulation of doctors, unethical. And it caused a problem. So that's objective truth, is that the way that they prescribed them, it changed the standard in which we view pain as people in the United States, to where we're associating moderate pain with opioid prescriptions or opiate. Either or. Okay. And so that is the issue, is that because they were overprescribed, people associated things that would not normally, that opiates wouldn't normally be applied to, with being prescribed opiates. And so that created a emphasis and a kind of a obsession for some people with the feeling of pain. And so the truth is pain is a normal part of life. Now, if it's to the point that you can't function and you're in complete suffering and misery, there should be something that could reduce that. So that's my take when it comes to the Sackler family. Like, they were unethical, they were messed up. The thing is that if those meds are implemented in a ethical way, they're effective. There are people with cancer who take Oxy, they're able to take it. Now, there are issues that come up with that, but let me go to the next thing. Let me segue to the next thing. So we got the Sackler family, we got the overprescription, we got that. Okay, now it was pulled back. So that's like you give someone Oxy and then say, here, try a Tylenol after that. Right. What is someone going to think? This isn't effective. What I mean? It's a matter of perspective. You give someone something really strong and then give someone something that's really weak. it's, they're going to be like, this doesn't work for me, and that's up for them to decide ultimately. But so basically they pulled back so much so that doctors started being hyper focused on the possibility of someone basically getting opiate use disorder or opiate addiction. So dependency is like, if you take opioids every day consistently for I think it's like 2 weeks or more, or maybe even a week. I'm not sure on the numbers of that, but you become dependent. So, but the thing is there's a big difference between dependency and addiction. Dependency, as it relates to physical dependency, is tolerance and potential withdrawal. Now, then when we look at substance use disorder or opiate use disorder, that's the use of opioids or opiates despite negative consequences. So there can be plenty of people out there that are actually being lumped into the opiate use disorder category that are just dependent. So we're not really fluent as a society when it comes to the real definitions of these words. And so people who are just opioid dependent are lumped in. And this is a clear discrepancy. So you pull back the meds, and now, yes, some people are going to go to the streets. They're going to try to buy these things. But now it's like a standard. Doctors are scared to prescribe these medications. And so simultaneously, we also had, fentanyl come out, carfentanil, these analogs, these nitazines, xylazine, analog of clonidine, which is not an opioid. And so these things all came out, during this pullback. So basically, people are dying just in mass quantities. I think it's up to like 200 people a day in the United States because there is no access to opioids. So do I think that, again, I think opioids are not effective for me long term. I think that they kind of perpetuate pain. But the thing is like, I had to set that bias aside and kind of, again, check myself and check my ego and just be like, hey, dude, what's happening right now? You weren't using during that time. You're not using during this time. You stopped using in 2014 when fentanyl was just becoming a thing, really. So you weren't even in that shit. So how are you going to dictate what's right and what's wrong? So basically, the prohibition currently, like, to get to your question specifically, prohibition is fueling the epidemic at this point. And we see this with rhetoric and propaganda, like the idea that fentanyl can kill you by touching it, which is a complete fallacy. That is not a thing. It is disproven by toxicologists and by scientists. This demonizing of fentanyl to the point that it's causing mass hysteria, which it's bad enough as is, bro. It's terrible. It's really sketchy. It's like super strong. So we see people passing away from very small amounts of it. So fentanyl is scary as is. And so it's not just, the pullback of the prescriptions. It's also the rhetoric and the ideas that no one is willingly taking it, that it's just accidental. And in my opinion, the idea that it's a weapon of mass destruction. So then we're tying into the war on drugs. So stay with me here. So now we're labeling it as a weapon of mass destruction. We're simultaneously prohibiting opioids. And what this does is it further demonizes it, which, it's like I said, it's bad enough as is. I'm not advocating for fentanyl. It's fucking like, it's rough. But what happens when you do that is you create more drug policies that are harming people, that are, basically putting people into prison and contributing to that complex. And everyone is kind of left behind to try to pick up the pieces and do what they can. But, at this point, to rein it in and just to try to put a bow on it, basically, all of this leads to people dying. So you pull back and you basically police and criminalize these different versions. Now there's another version. Now there's a stronger version. That's why we see the prevalence of nitazines. That's why we see the prevalence of xylazines. Those were lesser known. Now they're more common. You'll see on the news, bro, like every month there's like a new substance that they're like, this is the new one. Right. So basically, look, the black market, the illicit market will continue. I think even with reduction in prohibition or the complete, stopping prohibition. But the thing is that people will gain access to that. And now we have to talk about what are the implications of that. So there needs to be infrastructure to actually set that up to where it will actually be beneficial. So what that looks like is if you're going to tax things, you use that for harm reduction and treatment resources. And we basically overhaul the whole way that we talk about this. So I'm going to shut up here, but it's a cultural reset that needs to happen. It's a recovery revolution as far as it relates to the recovery community. And we need to just talk about this in a different way, basically. And that is like one of my main life goals at this point is to contribute to that and to change the narratives that we have, because they're archaic and they need to change, and we're just seeing people die. But I'm going on and on now.
No, I love it. Quick question. So most of us, I guess the public's perception is that it all stems from opioids and opiate misuse, meaning that if you see someone outside now doing heroin, or if you see someone outside doing any type of drug and they're really messed up and they're on the street, it's usually this narrative now that, oh, the doctor prescribed them something, pulled it back, and then they hit the streets and now they're stuck. Is that always the case that brings people there? Like, at the way with it? Because now it's hard to tell. I'm even feeding into the narrative, so I'm curious, because that's where the compassion comes from. Hey, it was someone's grandmom. She was just a regular teacher. It was a regular normal person, right? Like, as if someone who else that's addicted is not a regular normal person. But the idea is that it may have been someone who never drank, never did drugs a day in their life, had an injury, and then somehow that injury, they prescribed them opioids or opiates, and then then they pulled it back. And then it got them dependent, and then they hit the streets to find something stronger, usually resulting in overdose and stuff like that. So we have the overdose problem, which a lot of my friends and our friends in the recovery community they have family members who unfortunately died, who was normal kids in high school, maybe, a football game or something, a shattered ankle led them into opioid misuse and then getting stuck. What's the narrative? What's some of the non-traditional ways people wind up on the streets versus just opioid being prescribed these opiates? And what can we say to people that's overdosing and family members who are victims of family who died due to opioids and stuff like that? So,
that's a thing. There are people who are prescribed opioids and then they end up buying things from the illicit market because they don't have access. That is something that I experienced. I was prescribed opioids after being hit by a car, and, I was going and trying to get them very consistently, and then doctors were able to see through that. So a lot of this does have to do with the communication with doctors. So there are people who are legitimate, I don't want to just label it as legitimate, but there are people who could actually utilize pain meds without issue. Without opiate use disorder, a dependency, but not opiate use disorder, which is very different. The thing is that, doctors are now trained to look at drug seeking to the degree that it is causing people to feel isolated and unsupported and unheard. And then they do go to the streets. Now, this brings up a really important topic, is that there needs to be pain advocates, or what they label themselves as legacy pain patients, that teach people with legitimate chronic pain how to talk to doctors. So that's the first thing, is that if you go into a doctor and you're like, I need some Percocet, they're going to be like, yo, are you choking me, bro? Are you kidding me? No, I'm not going to give you Percocet. Right. So there is a lot of that. Okay, so that's relevant. But when it comes to people who are, in a position to where they're unhoused, or they are, they're overdosing, consistently or whatever, like, there are so many different scenarios. There are people now who go into using, pressed Fent pills, basically, as like some of the first things that they're even experimenting with. So there are people who do that. There are people who, are already maybe opioid dependent, or maybe they have opiate use disorder, and then they get a blue or an M30 or an M-Box, and they just realize that it's more cost effective and that it's stronger and more potent. So that speaks to what I was saying earlier, is that the way that we're talking about this generally as the society is that this is just accidental. There's only, that is a thing. Yes, there are people who think they're taking, a Molly, or they think they're taking a rather a pressed X pill, and, they have Fent, or, any of these other powders and pills. Like, that's happening. But the thing is like, there are a lot of people who, are just in that culture, in that subculture of substance use. And, it's very joked about and kind of, laughed off, even, like the idea of taking a perk, a fake perk. And, we see it within, just a lot of different communities. We see it within our culture, our music, as you know, bro. Like, literally we had the TikTok, song, I just popped a perk 10, I just popped a perk, it's like, and people are dancing to it and shit. And I'm honestly not mad at that. I don't really, it's just, it doesn't give a good vibe to me. The point being is that when people get to that position, there's unique stories for everyone. So I'm not going to put the blanket statement that, oh, it's just only people who had scripts. But as you mentioned, this is really relevant because it actually can help kind of bring people in who are only valuing so-called normal people. So, it's like, okay, if you want to, bring up the grandma or the nurse or whatever, someone that we actually value in order to spread light on this, then that's great. All right. Now, to answer your question about what I say to family members of people who've lost loved ones to fentanyl or to other opioids, synthetic opioids or analogs, what's happening now is a lot of those people are being kind of taken advantage of by institutions and by law enforcement and by the DEA and they're basically their grief is being taken advantage of, and the information that they're getting is based on continued prohibition. It's based on continuing to police. It's based on sending people to prison for murder if they sell fentanyl. So we may disagree on this one, bro, but I don't think that's serving anyone. I think that, again, there are people who do not know they're delivering fentanyl. They are not aware of that. They have a batch that they don't know what's in it. And so now it's just further filling our prisons, which I don't think is effective personally. I think when we look at privatized prison systems, or just prisons in general, like, basically using people for free labor and just the perpetuation of all of these just ways of thinking and practices, I'm not with that. I'm not with that. I don't agree with it. I think that, I'm not going to sit here and be condescending to someone who lost a loved one or who, their loved one got maybe murdered or something, and they feel that the person who did that needs to go to prison. Like, that's not what I'm not really speaking to that. I'm just speaking in the context of what is now happening is, again, people they're kind of being drawn in to a lot of these propaganda campaigns, and it is perpetuating the problem to where we see the rhetoric that it is a weapon of mass destruction and that it's just China trying to kill everyone in the US and that it's just the cartels in Mexico. And what does that sound like? It sounds kind of like when we heard weapon of mass destruction the last time. It does. You know what I'm saying? It sounds a lot like
an agenda. It's a political agenda.
It's an agenda. It is an agenda. And so I go the other way. Everyone's like, it's a conspiracy to kill everyone. Da, 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 da. I'm like, bro, this is supply and demand, bro. This is supply and demand. People are seeking it out. Anyone out there who is actively seeking opioids right now, for the most part, is seeking out fentanyl. So,
wow.
So, and that is according to, I'm collaborating with a treatment center. I talk to people that work in detox. The majority of people coming in they have fents in their system, and a lot of which are also not feeling comfortable to even admit that because of the stigma. So even when we look at, the parents that are saying, oh, my kid never did drugs, it's like, you don't necessarily know that. I'm sorry, you really don't. Like, especially if you're fostering this kind of just say no type shit with your kids, you think they're going to come to you and be like, yo, and a lot of this sounds very like insensitive, and I'm not trying to come off as that. I'm just defensive of the people that are still alive. And again, that even sounds insensitive, but I have nothing but compassion for anyone who's lost anyone in their life, no matter how that has happened. The thing is that we need to advocate for the people that are here and that are actively using. And by further, stigmatizing this shit and making people want to hide it and just using these narratives, it's just going to perpetuate the problem more. So I have nothing but compassion, but I encourage people who have lost someone to look into harm reduction, specifically look into harm reduction, and to look into recovery for yourself, not from substance use disorder necessarily, but from the trauma that you've endured, because that is a legitimate trauma and you deserve healing and peace and reprieve, and you deserve closure. But it's not going to help to get this vendetta and try to send people who potentially sold someone a substance to prison for the rest of their life, especially if they unknowingly did that. So this is a controversial take, bro, but I'm very passionate about it. And, I'm not going to, again, I want a disclaimer. I'm not trying to fucking dictate the way that you need to grieve. You can be angry. You could want to you could have a vendetta, and that's fine. I'm just saying, there's a lot more to this.
Right. And I love it. So that brings me here. You mentioned harm reduction versus recovery, or harm reduction being a form of recovery, or just being recovery, right? How can parents and family members better address the issue with their kids instead of just having a say no campaign? What's the new language that they could use to foster kind of like open communication, so where if a kid is actually using, they feel comfortable with speaking to their parents about it? That's the first part of the question. And the second part is, if someone is trying to do harm reduction, can they go the medical route and go to their doctor for help, or do they have to go to the streets? First part, family. Second part, how do we deal with harm reduction in the medical community?
Okay, so the first thing for me is using non-stigmatized language. So using person first language, what it's called. So we want to, in my opinion, we want to use terms like substance use disorder. We want to educate on the difference between dependency and substance use disorder. That needs to be a common understanding that everyone should have at this point. And basically, we need to frame this as we need to actually acknowledge that drugs feel good, and that they have an application, and that it's not always that you use one time and you are homeless on the streets. That narrative it's not working. It's not helping. So this is tied into the culture of parenting, and this ties into the culture in schooling and education. We learn really quick. I don't know about you, but I learned pretty quick that adults are bullshitting a lot of the time, and they don't know what they're talking about a lot of the time. Okay. Kids are smart. They're not stupid. A lot of them are very intuitive and can read energies, and depending on where you come from, there's other things that can come into play to where we have to just adjust accordingly depending on our surroundings. So this starts on a cultural level, to where at school we're basically given these horror stories and stuff. Now, I'm not saying we don't share about the adverse consequences and stuff. It just needs to be balanced. It needs to be balanced. And I'll go a little bit deeper really quick and just say that the way that we reduce adolescent problem use and drinking is by creating a space, creating a society that's based on prioritizing human life, and that isn't so dehumanizing and overstimulating. Which that sounds like a really big overhaul, but that's totally possible. It totally is. It would take we could do it in under a decade if we really put our mind. What does that look like? It looks like, changing the education system. I'm going to go off on a tangent, so I'll stop. But it looks like changing things on a cultural level, basically. Okay. And so when it comes to the parent communicating, it just needs to be a non-BS approach. And it needs to be based on transparency and honesty, as opposed to authoritarianism. Kids don't like authoritarianism. They don't like authority. Most of them, maybe some do, but I don't know about you, bro. I hated that. I was like, nah. And you probably don't know what you're talking about if you're trying to tell me something like this. So it has to do with the words we use. So we're not using these emotionally charged words with all this shit tied to it. So then if the kid ends up having substance use disorder, they don't want to say shit, because I don't want to be an addict. I don't want to be associated with that. Right. So you see what I'm saying? Like it has to do with being tactful and understanding and just like a little bit more moderate. I'm sorry, like moderate is a good word. Like you're moderate with your delivery. You're acknowledging, hey, this is the risk of this. Hey, this is the application of this. This is what it is. And when you do that, kids aren't as likely to like hide and do this behind the back thing or this sneaky thing, because it's like it's out in the open. You know what I mean? And look, regardless of what you say as a parent, the way that we address these things culturally will basically like cancel a lot of that out. So you could be the most understanding parent in the world who is just super like non-stigmatized, like just cool, understanding, tactful. But then when you go into school, now you're being programmed by a whole set of authority figures that can completely just kind of ruin that. So like that is what I found with like cannabis growing up in a hippie family. I was like, oh, this is just normal. This is just what people do. And then I go to school and I, make a joke about it and I get in a bunch of trouble. Right. And they're like, you know what I'm saying? So it's like, I wish it was just as simple. I just, I would say don't send your kids to public school. Like, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like, and that's even deeper. That's a whole nother story. But what was your second question? I'm sorry.
The second one was like, all right, so I want to give everyone a scenario. I have a friend of mine who came to me, and I think I spoke to you about that. So I want to frame this for anyone that's kind of using in secrecy, whether it's Percocets or opioids or pills or whatever it is, right? So she contacted me and she says, hey, Pop, I'm checking out Soap is Dope. I've been using Percocets for 3 years and I don't like the way I feel and I want to get off of them. So I figured it was illicit, right? She probably got them. She didn't get them from a doctor. So she's finding some creative ways to get these things on a consistent basis. And the question was, well, what do I do? Where do I start? She said, I have no idea where to start. So the first thing I wanted to, I wanted to ask you is, where does someone start that's kind of like doing this, having these problems in secrecy? She never told anyone in her whole life. She has a kid, a regular family, a job, and everything. And Pop was the first person she spoke to about it. And then I came to you because I wanted to be responsible and give us some really good information. Where do we start with that for someone that's dealing with any type of drug use in secrecy? And how do they detox and get off of it? So we're talking about, is it a harm reduction thing or like, how do they do it?
Yeah, okay. So I remember what you said now. I'm sorry I got sidetracked. So I want to just quickly answer that and then I'll go into this. So when it comes to like, how is someone implementing harm reduction? Are they just going to the streets and buying stuff? So if you're buying things on the illicit supply, you're testing them with test strips, with fentanyl test strips, and you're making sure that someone around you is, first of all, you're not using alone ever. You never use alone, no matter what. And if the other person is with you, they need to be conscious so that they can administer naloxone. So you need to have naloxone around you that someone else can administer. And you need to test things with test strips if you're trying to avoid fentanyl. Now, the blunt truth is some people want fentanyl, so they may test it to make sure it is fentanyl. And I have no jab at that, but that's that's where we're at right now. But if you're in that scenario and you're actually seeking out fentanyl, just again, do not use alone. And someone needs to know when you are actively administering. If you are, administering intravenously, someone needs to know and someone needs to have access to you immediately with naloxone. Now, if you're, that is harm reduction. That is a way to reduce harm by testing and by having naloxone and by people understanding how to administer it. Now, if you're getting from, a doctor, again, that's harm reduction. You could be someone who is using, methamphetamine and you are now prescribed, an ADHD medication. And that is 100% harm reduction. You're not you don't have to worry about, the supply being tainted or anything. So those are the two within, the non-illicit space, the prescription space, and the illicit space. You just want to have all of those things available. If you're shooting up, you need to have clean needles. If you're snorting things, you need to have separate straws. You don't share straws with people. If you need to use good, clean water. There's people there's harm reduction agencies that provide saline. So you have, everything that you need for that. There's people who supply syringes that don't have needles for people who want to boof things, like administer them rectally, which is harm reduction as opposed to using intravenously. So, right. And this just sounds wild. Like when you say this to the average person, they're like, "What, bro?" Like,
yeah, we came a long way.
Boof things? No, I'm just saying there is a harm reduction solution to any of those things. Now, when it comes to, like, let's say that you've used in secrecy, you're dependent on something that you bought, from the illicit supply, and this is now not sustainable for you. What do you do? Well, what you do in most cases is you would go to an addiction medicine doctor, aka a addictionologist, and an addictionologist practices addiction medicine. So they're going to understand, and they're not going to come from a stigma-based approach. Now, if you go to like a normal doctor and you're like, "Hey, I've been taking fake perks, hook me up with some real perks," they're going to be like, "Yo, no." Like, it's the same kind of deal to where it's like, you got to get in where you can. And the people, the doctors and practitioners that are, associated with addiction medicine are going to be more likely to give you basically medication-assisted treatment. So that's going to be things like Suboxone, methadone, Sublocade, which is a shot, and then there are things like naltrexone, Vivitrol and stuff like that, which are more blockers than actual partial agonists. Right. So a lot of these medications are, like Suboxone is a partial agonist, unless I'm mistaken. I'm pretty sure it is. And basically, you can go and get these prescribed from addictionologists in person. When we talked last, this was like not that long ago that we talked, like they were changing the requirements for prescription, and they made it to where any doctor could prescribe them. They're trying to take that away now, apparently. I don't know where we're at with that. Apparently, some people are pissed off at that. Regardless, there is access. There are just more barriers to entry when it comes to an in-person office visit, and depending on how much that in-person office visit costs. Right now, there are telehealth options. I know that I'm going to give free promo to this place right now, but it's called Recovery Delivered, I think. I'm not associated with them at any capacity. I don't know any. I just, I know that they do that.
Shout them out. That was the sub.
Again,
recoverydelivered.com or something like that.
I can't tell you if it's
Google,
an app,
so they have to Google.
You can just Google that. Yeah, I'm not sure if they're going to be affected by any potential changes. I don't think so, because I'm pretty sure they probably have addiction medicine doctors. So that's the answer. That's like viewed as the gold standard. There's a lot of stigma around Suboxone and methadone and stuff. And the thing is like, again, it didn't work for me, but hey, that was just me. And I had to kind of check that and be like, people are dying. So let's implement some stuff to where it will actively reduce harm. Even if this is just a blunt truth, even if someone was abusing Suboxone, they are less at risk than if they were to be using fake perks. Like, that's just that's where we're at, bro. That's where we're at. And it's like a lot of people, they don't want to kind of throw up the white flag, and I get it, but it's like, bruh.
Yeah. Quick question. Can your personal doctor, if you know how to ask him, refer you to an addictionologist?
Technically, yeah. I mean, I think a lot of that has to do with like who they know, you know what I mean? Or who's in, like, who they associate with, who they rub shoulders with, I can't really say for sure across the board. I would say any like reputable, I mean, I don't want to like invalidate other doctors, but like any doctor who is like informed is going to at least be able to have their secretary or some shit hop on a Google. Right. You know what I mean? So like they may not have a peer that's in that field, but you can find addictionologists in pretty much every state. They can be kind of tricky to find because a lot of them are tied to IOPs. So a lot of
What's the IOP?
So IOP is intensive outpatient.
Okay.
And then there's PHP, which is partial hospitalization. So a lot of those are like, outpatient settings. And a lot of addictionologists are basically just employed by those. So it's like they're lumped into the IOP, and so in order to gain the medication, you also have to attend IOP in some scenarios. With telehealth, you don't.
You
So
don't
that's the
telehealth.
thing.
Okay.
You don't with telehealth, from my understanding, because I mean it's online. Like there's not a physical space to go to. Some of those may be tied to IOPs where they have that as like an option, but really for the most part, no. Like you just Google addiction medicine specialist near me. You Google addictionologist near me, and you just ask questions. What are your requirements? Do I have to go to IOP? Do I need to be fresh out of treatment? You got to tell them everything that you're consuming. Like you got to say everything. I take benzos, and I also am looking for medication assisted treatment. Like they need to be informed. So it's each individual's responsibility to be like, what am I taking? Or else you can find yourself in a sketchy situation to where you're like, you could be at risk of having harm from the medication assisted treatment if you're abusing ketamine and benzos,
and you're lying about it, or you're not being honest.
Yeah, like you can be taking all these central nervous system depressants, and then you have respiratory failure from so that is really relevant too. It's not just like a Band-Aid. It needs to be like accountability with it.
I kind of feel like they should make it a little bit easier for people. It sounds like it's still kind of difficult just to get the help. And I feel like I have to go back and talk to that young lady, because she mentioned that she just made an appointment with her regular doctor, and I was like, "You're good to go." But I'm probably gonna have to tell her to look for and you know what? The first thing I said is just, why don't you just go to a detox? Let's start with a detox. Right? From there they could recommend you to IOP or something like that. But most people say, I have kids, I have a job, I can't take days off, I can't. And I always try to tell people, look, you have to prioritize your healing. All right. That's one thing I'm big on at Sober's Dope. Cash in those vacation days, give the kids to a family member. Take a week or two to just get this right, at least get the ball rolling in the right direction. But it's harder when you're just trying to pretend to be normal because you was doing this in secrecy. So now you want to continue. You want to try to get off of it in secret. It's tough, man. I don't know what to do really. I'm gonna tell her to contact telehealth. And what was the other place that you mentioned? The recovery delivery.
I think it's called Recovery Delivered. I'm pretty sure.
Recovery Delivered. All right.
And again, I'm not getting any kickbacks for this. Shout out to them, regardless. I mean, I heard of this one, and apparently they do ADHD medication, other medications other than Suboxone and stuff. But yeah, no, it's tricky. I think telling people to go to detox is like, the thing is that's the safest way, to where it's like when you're trying to self-implement a medication and you're like maybe still using another one, it's like, well, how do you go about that? If you take the Suboxone too soon, you're going to go into precipitated withdrawal, and you're going to feel the worst you've ever felt in your life. So it's not as simple as I took a perk earlier and now I'm going to take Suboxone. Nah.
Yeah. They have to taper?
You have to wait a certain amount of time before you can even take it. And so you need to basically not consume it for, I believe, I can't tell you the exact hours. I believe it's 48 hours. Maybe I could be totally wrong on that. It could be less. I don't remember, because I went through this almost 10 years ago. But that's what they did for me, is they were like, you can't take anything. I was in detox, and they're like, no, we'll give you like comfort meds for your benzo withdrawal, but we're not giving you anything for a period of time for the opioid withdrawal. And then they implement the Suboxone. So, because precipitated withdrawal is just basically the most intense form of withdrawal you could ever experience. It's like times 10. So, that's where I do think detox, like I tell everyone, detox.
Right.
Detox. Go to detox. Like there's even outpatient detox. There's
outpatient detox. I didn't know that. There we go. We're getting somewhere. Outpatient detox. That's big.
It's not as common, but it's there, bro. It's there. You got to look specifically for outpatient detox. You're going to have medication management. You're going to go in. You got to go in to like talk to them and stuff, but you're not like laid up in a bed there for however long. So that's a thing too. But you are right there.
And go ahead. No, it's not, and it's not recommended just to go cold turkey without professional medical supervision or someone. Like just stopping it is not recommended. Okay.
No, because you look. So like benzos and alcohol are the two main things that take your life because you have seizures and the complications. Opioids, they make you, I was going to say it in a less eloquent way, but they give you diarrhea and they make you vomit. That's what they can do. And so if you're vomiting and you have diarrhea, you have fluid loss and you get dehydrated, and that causes cardiac symptoms. You can have cardiac arrest and other things that, and arrhythmia and all these other things that can come up. So again, that's not medical advice. It is not safe the only thing that you can really do at home is cannabis, really. If you want to get real about it. I mean, you could say stimulants as well, but then with stimulants, you can have a drop in blood pressure, to where, that can be really dangerous. With opioids or downers, your blood pressure goes up drastically, and with stimulants, your blood pressure goes down. So that can be sketchy. So you basically, like I said, the main thing is like cannabis. Yeah, you can ride it out. Nicotine, ride it out. 72 hours of nicotine. When it comes to all these other things, like fentanyl especially, it's more pronounced. And so you can pass away. The real issue is that if you have a complication and you're unsupervised, that no one attends to you, no one responds. You're at home and you have a seizure, or you're vomiting and having diarrhea to the point that you're literally dying, and you're by yourself. No one's there to physically pick you up if you lose consciousness. You can't call 911 if you're unconscious, so it's really about that. It's about understanding that you could potentially, like, some people do it and they put that narrative out there, like, just do it at home. It's like, bro, no. Like, it's not safe. I avoid any type of medical advice like that ever. I would not. People try to get it from me, bro. They're like, just tell me how to do benzo detox at home.
Yeah, man. You guys, I always tell people we're big advocates for medically assisted detoxes on Sober's Dope, and we're big advocates of rehab on Sober's Dope. And the same thing with you, I know. It's the best way. I mean, look, do it if you're really serious. What I tell people, you really no, because that's judgmental, because they could be serious without going to an extreme like that. But if you want to increase chances of success and really you want it to be as healthy for you to process, try to get professional help. That's what I always say. Just try to consider it, and don't worry so much about what people may think or hiding it. Just do what you have to do. Now, I wanted to ask a quick question. Why are some people dying off of fentanyl, some people are not? So you have someone who could be taking it every day and be fine, and someone like the actor Michael K. Williams, who probably was trying to do recreational cocaine, gets a bad hit and then goes into cardiac arrest and dies. Like,
yeah, it's opioid opiate naive, or a lack of tolerance, basically, is that that's really it. It's just like, there's people who use Fent every day, and it's like, bro, they could take a dose that's going to kill any average person who tries to take it. So you get a dependency, and then it's, you have a physical tolerance, basically, and that sets it apart. So that's why we're seeing the issue with people using something, and they pass away. And that doesn't mean that they used for the first time, though. And that, that's the thing, is that people are dictating that now because maybe they have a belief about their loved one, and they don't want that to be part of their story, is that they willingly took something. And the thing is that there are scenarios to where, you do some coke and you think that it's a stimulant, and then it has an opioid. So those people are seeking out a stimulant, and they probably have a stimulant dependency if they're doing it regularly. So that's the issue, is that they have a stimulant dependency, but they do not have an opioid dependency. And so they use it, and it's like, yo, you're out. That's it. So it really just has to do with that. Some people can just, take ungodly amounts of substances. That's definitely my story, to where I would just, consume such massive amounts. And it was because your body, you get used to it. You know what I mean? So
get used to it.
That's what it is. I mean, there's definitely other scenarios to where, if someone has some sort of issues with their heart, and, maybe a smaller dose could cause them to lose their life because they already have cardiac issues. They already have issues with their breathing, with the respiratory system. They already, there's all these different things that can come into play. But I would say it's really just because the people who do it every day, they're doing it every day. So they got that, they got that dependency, they got that tolerance.
Right. I read somewhere in an article, I don't know if it was fake news or whatever, but they said that on vacation, I think it was the family rented a vacation home, and it was fentanyl residue, and it killed one of the kids or something like that. Did you ever? Is that possible?
Yeah. I mean, the thing is like when it comes to passive exposure, you have to get it into your orifice. So a kid could lick a utensil or a plate that had fentanyl in it. That's totally a thing. You have to ingest it though. Passive exposure is not a thing. Like according to toxicologists, you could throw fentanyl in the damn air, and you're not going to OD from it because it has a low vapor point. It doesn't hover in the air. Apparently, you could literally throw it up. There's proposed. I don't know if this is a real study, but there's the wind tunnel theory, or I don't really know what's labeled as, but they're basically claiming that you would have to be in a wind tunnel with, I think, like pounds and pounds and pounds distributed over the span of 2 hours in order for it to reach a therapeutic dose. So you'd have to be in a wind tunnel with them siphoning in fentanyl for it to reach a therapeutic dose. Now, when you look at patches, transdermal patches, those take like 12 hours to fully like reach their potential. So like they spent tons of money on formulating that to actually work. So we're not like passively touching it.
So what's the most fatal way you can ingest it? Like what's the worst? Like how are people ingesting or taking fentanyl? I don't even know. Is it pills?
They're swallowing a pill. They're smoking, or rather vaping, a pill by smoking it off foil. So you put it on top of foil and you light the foil under it. And then there's people who are using intravenously, which is going to be the most dangerous mode of administration because of all the other things also associated with it, as far as bloodborne illnesses, as far as the quick onset of that is going to be far more profound. You could say that the onset of smoking is really quick as well, but the thing is that, or vaping, you kind of denature it to a certain degree when you're applying heat. Like that's where the idea that you can smoke weed and OD on it is being debunked, is that cannabis is burned at a temperature that is way higher than fentanyl can withstand. Now, so basically a lot of those claims are now being refuted and proven to be false. I don't know that. I would assume that if you vaped it, that somehow that would work, but now people are refuting that. So the main thing is just like, I would say the most common to the average person, obviously, is going to be just putting it in their mouth. That's like the average person. They're not going to pull out a needle. They're not going to I don't think they're going to smoke it or hit it off some foil for the first time. It's really just you're putting it in your mouth, and you're swallowing it.
And most of the cases I read, like with the comedians, that group of comedians last year, that they was taking party cocaine and they was sniffing it and it was stopping. They all 3 or 4 of them died in a set. You had groups of people dying that you could see they bought a bad batch. It was, may have made a circuit. So you might have 2 people on this side of town, 4 people over here, 12 people over here. So it's like, you just have to, I guess, carry test strips to test your cocaine, I guess, right?
Yeah. You have to test any. The thing is people are assuming because it's a stimulant that there's not going to be anything in there. A lot of harm reductionists are refuting the idea that they could be in stimulants. I don't think that's a good policy. I think that it's really just like you test any powder and pill.
Right, test anything. There we go.
You can't test things that aren't water soluble. So you can't take a bud of some cannabis and put it in some water. Like that's not, technically if there was a fentanyl in there, it would, dissolve into the water. But the thing is, like I said, a lot of those claims have been refuted.
Even the weed thing now? Because they said that it's a marijuana now. That's been refuted?
That's now currently being refuted. And the fact that, again, it completely denatures, like it ruins it once you burn it. So... when you burn it, it's just like, that's not, when people are smoking it, they're putting it on foil and the heat is applied to the foil and there's a barrier between that to where, applying a direct flame is a totally different issue. Now, what I speculated was when you burn a joint, all of the output you're getting isn't just from the ember. It's also simultaneously vaporizing the cannabis that is not yet lit. So I was starting to think, I thought to myself, oh, well, it could vape that. Now it could vape the fentanyl. If it's the embers next to it, it could potentially vape it. And from what I'm hearing, it would still be denatured when you look at the heat of an ember on a joint, or the heat that's applied when you were to light a bowl or something. So the thing is that there's yet to be any of these claims substantiated, and that they're reading of the same type of passive exposure propaganda that's being perpetuated by law enforcement, to where it's always a friend of my friend's daughter. It's never been actively proven, according to my knowledge. And the thing is that, you know, basically because it hasn't actively been, you know, proven and substantiated, that just it honestly just kind of illegitimizes it. It becomes sort of like a myth. And you know, the thing is like I said, I'll shut up and say I'm wrong if it's like actively, you know, proven, you know. So the thing is like, again, it's kind of lumped into this whole thing. And then you could say, well, why would anyone do it? I think in the only scenario that would happen is that accidental cross-contamination, to where someone uses a surface or a scale, you know, again. But this is the blunt truth, and then I'll end there with this, is that no one wants to admit that they did fentanyl.
Okay.
So a lot of people are doing fentanyl, overdosing, and then saying that they just smoked weed that was laced. I'm sorry. That's 100%, bro. And I'm not going to say across the board, but bro, that's 100% happening, dude. Think about all we've touched on. Think about the stigma. Think about the idea that you only do it on accident. You do it. You have this image that you want to uphold. Your family is terrified, rightfully so. You're going to go, hey, yeah, I took a fucking fake perk. No, you're going to say, oh, dude, I just hit some weed. Like, maybe you were also smoking weed. You know, you did hit some weed, but the weed didn't. Like, it's that
shame. It backfires on us in society when we add that added shame and stigma and stuff. That's why I tell people they have to be careful with judging, because people are never going to be honest if we're judging them, and if they feel afraid. They say, I would be afraid to tell the truth if that was, I ain't, you know, you going to try to minimize it. Like, yo, I wasn't like, where I was coming up, it was crack that it would have been crack that we were talking about. Nobody would ever want to admit they was doing crack. It was such a bad stigma. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is crack still a thing? I haven't heard. Is it still, where's crack at?
Crack's still a thing, man. It's just, the thing is like, because the nature of crack, and because it's by nature and by definition is, you know, cut cocaine, like, I don't think it's as prominent when it comes to people, you know, smoking crack and then ODing on fentanyl. I'm pretty sure that's happened, you know, but again, you're lighting it on fire, actively lighting it on fire, unless most people aren't hitting it off foil, they're hitting it off a stem with a chore boy in it. So the thing is, you know, and I'm glad that you touched on that, because this is now the new stigma, is fentanyl.
It's a new crack.
And the thing is it's affecting all cultures and subcultures, whereas crack was projected as a black drug that, you know, that was, you know, like, just, it was totally related to that. And then even when we look, I'm not going to go too far into this, but then we look at the distribution and the real ties to the government getting it out within certain communities. It was very intentional. So that's where I think a lot of people get into the conspiracy with fentanyl and stuff. But the truth of the matter is like, you know, people seek it out, bro. People want it. If I was using, I would totally be seeking out fentanyl, bro. No question.
Okay.
Yes, dude. I did pharmaceutical fentanyl when I was using. I only got it one time, and I was like, bro, this is the best shit ever. Like, you know, and the thing is like, that's the type of communication I think is important, is to not go out and say, oh, this is the best shit ever, but go out and say, hey, this is something that makes you feel a certain type of way, and here's the risk with it. This is what this could potentially do to you. So when I was using that, I knew, because the person who provided it to me was like, hey, yo, if you go hard with this, you're not going to survive, bro. Like I had what was a sublingual swab, and it looked like a Q-tip, and you put it under your tongue and just swipe it under there, and it tastes like bubble gum. It was it was pretty ominous, just the flavoring of it. And the person who gave it to me told me right out of the gate, hey, this is what this is going to do to you. If you use too much of this, you will die. And, and so I went into it with the awareness that if I used too much of it, I would die. And when I tried it, I was like, oh, I can tell. I knew it. I was like, this is hella strong. So, the thing is, people are just kind of left to their own devices to, go against authority. And then they have a euphoric feeling and they're like, oh, this is great. And then it kind of invalidates all of the scary things they've heard, because they're like, nah, I don't care. I'll make that trade-off. So that's why it goes back to what I was saying earlier, in the importance of just the broad spectrum of things that it does, is talk about what it can do, talk about the application, and then talk about the truth of what the harm that it can cause, And so I don't know how I got into that, but
no, that was good. Lastly, what's up with Trank, man? Is it true that it's knocking people feet off and their hands are falling? The media be making it sound crazy. The people, the arms are falling off and all of that is corrosive.
Yeah. Abscesses are a thing with anyone who's using, intravenously. According to what I've gathered, there's something about the chemical composition of these formulations or these concoctions that are making people are just making it more likely for there to be, basically, I think, cell death, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
And then in conjunction with, you get these infections, and then I can't think of the word right now, but it's basically like a flesh eating.
Yeah, I heard flesh eating, right.
I mean, look, the thing is like, I've had people reach out to me on social media who have experienced these things. I think that it's a real thing. What I'm not with is the whole, these are zombies. Like, bro,
right.
Get out of here with that shit. Like,
yeah,
that I don't fuck with that, but it is objectively causing abscesses and people to potentially lose limbs and to have huge holes in their body and all of that, which is a real thing. And then depending on the needle that they're using, you have that, and then you're using a needle with bacteria in it.
Oh man.
You're continuing to infect it, basically. So that's a real thing. As I said, I'm not that informed when it comes to that. I think that when it comes to xylazine, the real thing that is concerning is the fact that that naloxone or Narcan doesn't work on that. But the thing is,
that's crazy. I didn't know that.
It's not an opioid. So it's an analog of clonidine, which is prescribed as a blood pressure medication.
Okay.
And then and it's used in veterinary medicine. Xylazine is used in veterinary medicine, but you still administer naloxone. If someone is unresponsive and you do sternum rubs on them, you try to get a response from them, and they're not responsive, it doesn't matter if you know that they OD'd or not. Narcan is not going to hurt them. So you give them naloxone, and it can block off, it'll take over that opioid receptor, block off the one that was binded to it, and that is still going to help. And then that can help holding the person off a little bit until emergency services get there. And so people need to learn how to do rescue breathing. That is what's recommended within the harm reduction communities, is that you do rescue breaths. You can get a mouth guard, so you don't have to put your mouth on someone else's. You can get those from endoverdose.net. You can, get all these tools to where you're basically prepping someone to be received by EMS, to where they can then, there are medications that they can implement that will combat the xylazine. So when I say that it doesn't work, like Narcan or naloxone doesn't work on xylazine, I'm not discouraging using naloxone. Use naloxone across the board, because it's going, it's going to help, but you don't. It's just, if someone is overdosing due to the combination of xylazine and an opioid or an analog of an opioid, they're, if that's actually happening, there's only so much you can do, and that is administer naloxone and do rescue breaths, basically.
Right. Oh man, you dropped it today. And I wanted you to shout out the place you're working at. What's the name of them again? The people over there that you was helping.
So I have a partnership and a collaboration with Infinite Recovery based out of Texas, and you know, we got treatment centers all throughout Texas, and aftercare, you know, complete continuum of care. So we got not only IOP, but PHP, which is partial hospitalization, sober living, detox, inpatient, all throughout Texas. So, you know, there's multiple locations, and it's accessible. They take most major insurance, you know, and so and I actually stand behind them. You know, I'm personally acquainted with the owners, and I have a rapport with them, and that's why I even co-signed them, because treatment is it's the Wild West when it comes to trying to figure it out, and you know, there are unethical treatment centers, and you know, a lot of sketchy shit going on. So
body brokering and stuff. We're against that. That's why I wanted you to shout them out. It's the first time we ever shouted out anyone on Sober is Dope, because I know you're behind it, and I know they have to be legit, because there's too many creeps out there, and it doesn't help us when we're trying to help people. You know, they go to places and have bad experiences, horrifying experiences. So what's the name again?
Infinite Recovery.
Infinite Recovery. Shout out to Infinite Recovery in Texas. So if you're listening and you're out there and you're in Texas, give them guys a ring. Hit up Macaulay Sexton, and that's what's up. What's new with you? Like, what's next for you? You're doing that. You have the TikTok. You have all of this stuff going on. We got what's next for Big Mr. Sexton? So
next for me is just continuing to advocate for person first language, ultimately a shift when it comes to a lot of the ways of thinking that we have out there. And I'm going to do that through advocacy, through public speaking, through stuff like this. Some other things that I got working on. I will articulate to you not on camera, because I fully believe that I don't want to just let anyone in, because you got to guard when you're growing and manifesting things. You got to be careful of who you tell those things. You know, who you tell that stuff to. Right. You know, but ultimately, you know, I do social media management, direction, marketing. So I'm, you know, I have opportunities coming up with different brands and stuff like that. And it's really just about, like, my whole thing, bro, is like I set my life up to where I can have just an emphasis on self-care, self-love, my recovery. I still do Clubhouse. So I have a meeting every Thursday at 4:30 Central called Alternative Recovery. And that is a community that I've built based on just alternative recovery. We got people who do any type of recovery. We have people who are doing things that other members can't do. We have people who their substance of choice is something that the other person is utilizing in their recovery. So that is what I'm all about. I like to hear original stuff. I like to hear new cutting edge stuff. I seek it out. I'm a nerd for recovery.
I like that.
Reading about it and figuring out like what I can bring in and how I can adjust. But it's just, bro, it's just going up from here. And the thing is it's all based on my recovery and my mental health. And so anything that I do, bro, I'm like, I go into it and I set the stage to where any collaborator, anyone I'm partnering with, anything I'm doing, I let them in. I show, hey, this is where I'm at. This is what I do. I will not compromise on these things. I will not be taken advantage of. I know my worth now, which took a long time. And, you know, I appreciate people like you, and that I have you as a friend, because, you know, you already had, when I first started talking to you, you know, I feel like you were already honoring me. And bro, shit has changed since we talked last time.
I know.
It has changed drastically. I'm a different, it's so cool how recovery you can continue to just peel apart these layers and just see more and more good shit and more challenges, more things. Hey, I need to address this. I need to look at this. So it's going up from here, bro. Like for me, it's just about stability and creativity and just feeling good about what you're doing, and
Right.
and the opportunities you have, you take the ones that are for you and you leave the rest. Like
Right.
that is where I'm at, and it's been a long time coming, and it's the catalyst was suffering.
Right.
The
And for
cat-
people who don't know, this is important. You are a person in recovery. How many years and what was your drug of choice and how many years are you clean and sober?
yeah, so my substances of choice were benzodiazepines and opiates. So
Okay.
and I've been in recovery for 9 going on 10 years.
Yeah, boy, that's
Uh,
what I'm talking about. And this is why we say sober is dope and like everything. Because look at you right now, bro. Like you, like, come on, man. Like you're just amazing. You're living this life. You're thriving. You're helping people. You look amazing. You're healthy. You have all of these ideas. If I looked at you, I would have never thought you had any issue at all, right? So it's amazing how far our recovery could take us into our life. So don't give up. If you're out there, don't give up. I'm proud of you, brother. It's been a minute, and I want you to come back on more often. And if it's and another thing, if it's anything that we need, like any news flashes or anything, let us know. We want to work more with your recovery team and everything that you got going on. And in closing, what I will always want to do, and this is important, any advice for anyone that's in early recovery from drug misuse, and any advice for they may be struggling with it, they don't know how to live a normal life, they don't know what to do. Do you have any parting words for them?
oh yeah, all right. So you just you set me up with that one, bro. I gotta. All right. So first of all, my focus is on practice and repetition. If you are feeling like you are just completely in over your head with all these recovery options, find something that you resonate with, do it repetitively. You can change the way that you think. You can literally create new neural pathways in your brain. You do not have to be in a state of perpetual suffering and craving for the rest of your life. You do not have to be at battle for the rest of your life. Recovery is a reprieve, in my opinion and experience. It's a reprieve. You can get relief. You don't have to be constantly just in this state of fighting. For me, I needed to get rid of the fight and get into the love of self and learn that I don't need to be rigid. At first, it has its application because we're changing our way of thinking and we have to change our association. But just to reduce it down, to a nice reduction is, be nice to yourself and learn, if you don't already, learn to love yourself. But be nice to yourself and don't bring in this mentality of punishing yourself, because a lot of us do that. We feel like we messed up for so many years that we just gotta, just put our heads down. And like, I get that. Look, if you want that grind mentality, that's fine. I had that too. But for me, it brought me to a place in recovery to where I did not feel good and it was not sustainable. So the name of the game is sustainability, and love yourself, because you're not just an addict. There's so much more to you. If you've experienced this, that is just an aspect of your existence, and you can actually address it and recover and be in a position to where, like Pop gave me the affirmation, we become fully actualized versions of ourselves if we put in that effort. And you can put yourself in a better position than you ever were prior to ever touching a substance. Not back to how you were before, because that sucked for me. I'm in a better position now, and it's all because of recovery. That sounded so like,
I
like
love
rehearsed,
it. I
but
love it. I love it. You describe post traumatic growth. You could become better than you were prior to the trauma of the drugs. All right. I love that. Well, friends and family, Sober is Dope Universe. That's a wrap for our episode with the amazing Macaulay Sexton. We love you all. Don't give up. Macaulay has 9 years. I have 10. We have proof and a concept that recovery does work in our lives. So reach out to us. Stay connected. Connection is key. Stay connected. Love yourself, and we'll catch you on the other side. Peace and love, family. God bless you all.